Georgia, a small country at the crossroads of Europe and Asia, has a history shaped by powerful kings, foreign empires, and wealthy elites who dominated the economy. When we think of economic power in Georgia, we often imagine oil pipelines, oligarchs, and modern politics. But the story begins far earlier, with ancient kingdoms where land ownership and tribute defined wealth. The idea of economic royalism, a system where wealth and influence are concentrated in the hands of rulers and elites, has been central to Georgia's story for centuries. In the early medieval era, Georgia was divided into various kingdoms and principalities. Wealth was tied directly to land. Kings and noble families, known as the aristocracy, controlled vast estates. Peasants worked the land and paid taxes or tribute to their lords, creating a hierarchical structure where power and wealth flowed upward. The royal court of Georgia's kings was not just political, but economic. Kings controlled trade routes that passed through the Caucasus, benefiting from Georgia's position on the Silk Road. Caravans carrying silk, spices, and precious goods moved through the region, and rulers taxed this commerce heavily. The feudal structure gave rise to powerful noble families, sometimes called aristavi, who held both military and economic power. These lords acted almost like miniature kings, and their influence was so strong that Georgian monarchs often had to negotiate with them to maintain control. In this sense, economic royalism in Georgia was not just about the monarchy, but also about a web of elites who ensured wealth stayed concentrated. During the reign of King David the Builder in the 12th century, Georgia reached a golden age. The monarchy consolidated power, and the economy thrived on agriculture, trade, and tribute from conquered territories. The royal family stood at the center of this system, distributing land to loyal nobles while collecting wealth to fund armies, churches, and grand architectural projects. But beneath this prosperity, inequality remained. Ordinary farmers and craftsmen had little chance of upward mobility, while the royal household and aristocracy enjoyed immense privilege. The Mongol invasions of the 13th century disrupted this system. Georgia's monarchy was weakened, and the economy suffered from destruction and heavy tribute payments demanded by foreign rulers. Yet, even under these conditions, the idea of elite economic control continued. Local nobles and surviving royal family members sought to protect their estates and extract as much as they could from the peasantry to maintain their power. In the centuries that followed, Georgia found itself caught between empires: the Persians, the Ottomans, and eventually the Russians. Each foreign ruler imposed their own form of economic royalism. Persian and Ottoman authorities demanded tribute and taxes, often collected by Georgian elites on their behalf. The Georgian nobility adapted to these shifts, maintaining their estates and privileges by cooperating with whichever empire dominated the region at the time. Wealth remained concentrated in the hands of a few, while ordinary people bore the brunt of taxation and labor. The Russian annexation of Georgia in the early 19th century marked a turning point. The Tsarist Empire brought Georgia into a new economic system, one that centralized power in St. Petersburg but relied on local elites to enforce its rule. Georgian aristocrats were integrated into the Russian nobility, maintaining their landholdings and status under the new regime. This preserved the tradition of economic royalism, with wealth tied to land, connections, and loyalty to rulers. Industrialization in the late 19th and early 20th centuries introduced new opportunities. Railways, mines, and oil pipelines began to appear in the Caucasus, particularly around nearby Baku. But even here, wealth concentrated at the top. Foreign investors, Russian administrators, and local elites controlled the profits, while Georgian workers labored in difficult conditions for little reward. The divide between the rich and poor remained stark, showing that economic royalism had simply adapted to a modern industrial context. The Soviet takeover after 1921 changed the framework, but not the underlying principle. Private land and wealth were abolished, and collectivization restructured the economy. In theory, this ended economic royalism, replacing elite families with state ownership. In practice, however, a new elite emerged. Communist Party officials, factory directors, and secret police chiefs became the new economic royalty of Georgia. They controlled access to resources, jobs, and privileges. Soviet Georgia became one of the more prosperous republics of the USSR, known for its wine, citrus fruits, and tourism on the Black Sea coast. Yet ordinary Georgians still faced shortages, rationing, and limited freedom, while party elites lived in spacious apartments, drove cars, and enjoyed special access to imported goods. The royalism of wealth had not disappeared, only transformed into a different structure. Instead of noble bloodlines, loyalty to the Communist Party determined who belonged to the new aristocracy. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, Georgia entered a chaotic period. Independence brought hope, but also deep economic crisis. The old Soviet system vanished overnight, and a new class of wealthy businessmen quickly emerged. These men, often connected to former party officials or criminal networks, became Georgia's oligarchs. They controlled industries, media outlets, and banks, filling the vacuum left by the collapsing state. The 1990s in Georgia were marked by instability, civil wars, and corruption. Economic royalism was alive and well, as oligarchs enriched themselves while much of the population faced poverty, unemployment, and emigration. Wealth and power concentrated in a few hands, echoing the patterns of centuries past. In the 2000s, Georgia experienced major reforms under President Mikhail Saakashvili. His government cracked down on corruption, restructured the police, and attempted to modernize the economy. While some oligarchs lost influence, others adapted to the new environment. Economic royalism shifted again, with wealth concentrating in different sectors, such as banking, construction, and energy. Saakashvili's reforms reduced some abuses, but did not eliminate elite dominance. One of the most notable figures in modern Georgia is billionaire Bidzina Ivanishvili. Often described as the richest man in the country, he made his fortune in Russia before returning to Georgia and entering politics. His role as a political kingmaker illustrates the persistence of economic royalism. Though he has held official positions, his wealth and influence give him extraordinary power behind the scenes, shaping Georgian politics and society in ways few ordinary citizens could match. Today, Georgia's economy is more open, with tourism, wine exports, and digital industries playing important roles. Yet inequality remains high, and many Georgians struggle with low wages and limited opportunities. The influence of wealthy elites continues to define the country's political and economic landscape. The story of economic royalism, stretching back from ancient kings to modern oligarchs, remains a defining feature of Georgia's history. When we look at Georgia's long history, we see a pattern. Whether under monarchs, nobles, foreign empires, Soviet officials, or modern billionaires, economic power has always been concentrated in the hands of a few. The names and systems change, but the principle remains the same. Georgia's story of economic royalism shows how deeply entrenched wealth and influence can shape a nation across centuries. And while Georgia today is a democratic republic with aspirations toward European integration, the shadow of elite power still looms large. The question for the future is whether Georgia can break the cycle of concentrated wealth and build a more equitable society, or whether economic royalism will continue to shape its destiny. Thanks for watching. Have you ever been to Georgia?